Welcome back to hour number 2 of the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. On a Wednesday morning, Bill Tatro is the author of 44th, A Presidential Conspiracy. And he's an economics expert and radio talk show host of It's All About Money. Is America too detached? That's one of the things we wanted to talk to him about this morning. And he wrote an article the other day called, But What's It to Me? A lot of people kind of look around right now, I think, and say, but what is it to me? These issues that are happening, well, it's not really hurting me per se, right? We welcome Bill to the show this morning. Bill, great to have you on the Gary Sutton Show. How are you?
I'm well, Gary. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you here. I was reading your article the other day, but what's it to me, and it was rather interesting. And I think there is that attitude in our country right now. What is it to me? I mean, a lot of people are kind of self-detached and not really getting involved, or maybe it's we've been deluged with so much information that it's hard to kind of get your mind wrapped around it sometimes. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right. The article is on my blog, BillTatro.com, but it's also on, and as you know, I write for Town Hall. We have 2.5 million readers. And so I was hoping I could touch a little bit of a nerve with that particular article. And people, let's use an example. They look at Greece and they say, that's over there. Well, that means nothing to me. That's over there. No, that's fine, and all the rest of that stuff. But then you look at one of the big components, and if I was to ask you in York, Pennsylvania, maybe your most significant, I don't want to say monument, but most significant thing to the citizens of York, Pennsylvania, whatever it was, okay, whatever it was.
Okay.
And if all of a sudden the town fathers said, we need to raise some money, so we're going to sell that item to China. Whether it's a town square, whether it's a park, whatever it is, we're going to sell it to China. And people say, well, that could never happen. Really? That's happening all over the world. And that's why the people in Greece basically said, no more. We're not going to do that. Then you get back here to the United States, and you take a look at some of the things that, you look and what's going on and what went on in Ferguson. And people say, it was interesting, very clever that the football players the week after came out of the end zone and they had their hands up with the don't shoot. And a congressman stood in Congress and had the hands up and said, don't shoot. Well, most people aren't aware that was an idea that was put together by the George Soros think tank. George Soros put $13 million to keep Ferguson alive. And so when you look at all that stuff, you say, okay, well, wait a minute. It's happening around the world, but it can't happen here. But it does. It's significant. And, there was a comment that was made by Mr. Goebbels. I'll just say his name was Goebbels, not a guy that's on Madison Avenue. He happened to work for Adolf Hitler and said, if you tell the lie long enough, people will believe it.
Right.
And that's what's happening right here in the United States.
We got a lot of people doing it, not only in politics, but some in business as well. You write in your article that the American public feels more financially secure, yet more economically detached in a new survey conducted by Bankrate.com. And it says, unfortunately, the only thing the survey proved was out of sight, out of mind, and the belief that others' misfortune is not really my concern. The other point is, and I'm almost ready to retch when I hear this anymore, is every politician who runs out and feels like they've got to include in there the middle class has got to grow. We got to help the middle class. We got to create jobs for the middle class. And you say in the next paragraph, most remaining middle class people, when really pushed, will acknowledge the fallacy of the 5.6% unemployment rate after all the 92 million people not counted in the participation pool are real. If, however, the public is not reminded of manipulated numbers when it's easier for them to accept a statement, the economy is improving after all, which I got from some guy in an email yesterday I was arguing with. And he said, we should feel better. The unemployment rate is better. I said, well, that's great, except that you have to look inside the numbers and you realize that in December, the wages went down. That's not a good thing. And what kind of jobs do we have out there? There's a lot of not real great quality jobs going on, part-time jobs. And then you ask the question, why are those coming about? I think citizens many times say, okay, president said the economy is better, move on. It doesn't bother me. I've kind of gotten used to this. So, I read those paragraphs in your article, and I think there are a lot of people who do think that way.
Well, Gary, one of the things, and you hit so many hot buttons right there. I mean, do we have 5 hours?
Sure. I'll make 5 hours for you, Bill.
We can go on with this like crazy, but there's an old saying that when your neighbor's out of work, that's a recession. When you're out of work, that's a depression.
Right.
And one of the things is that again we drive by. Think about the sensitivity. And I'm in Phoenix, and the number of people on the street corner with their cardboard has exploded. And when the first guy was out there, I would, throw a couple bucks his way, and he'd have his kids, and he'd have a dog, because I remember the old expression there, but the grace of God go I.
Absolutely.
And so all of a sudden now I'm seeing one on every corner. So I become jaded. And now I'm looking for the best sign. The other day I gave $5 to the guy who had the best sign. But we become jaded because it's not us. It's not, I still have my job. I got my kids to, not me, I'm an old guy. But I mean, I've got my kids and I'm taking them to the ball game. We're going to dinner this Friday night. So that's a story that's over there. Asia, Europe, that's a story over there. The people out of work in Ferguson, that was there. That's not me. It's not right here. Until it is. The most classic statement or poem, I want to say, or a comment was made back in Germany. And I just think it's so apropos today, and I use it a lot when I speak around the country. When they came and took away the businessmen, I didn't complain. When they came and took away the artists, I didn't complain. When they came and took away the Jews, I didn't complain. When they came to take me away, there was no one left to complain.
Right.
And so we look at the most recent thing I heard. Do you know that in New York City, if you were out with your bicycle delivering food to someone, you got a $300 fine because of this great storm that was going on there?
All 8 inches of it or whatever.
I was raised in upstate New York.
That's called a dusting up there.
Give me 6-7 inches of snow. That's a piece of cake.
Right.
And a lot of people are now saying, I know Gary Sutton this morning is saying, that's just a warm-up, folks. And in my book, 44th The Presidential Conspiracy, I talk about that it's a novel, but I talk about that. We are seeing a lot of things that are warm-ups for things to come. And that's why when people just stick their head in the sand, they're not seeing what is actually going on around them.
I was in an argument with someone yesterday on the internet, kind of a nice argument, but it was back and forth. A guy I respect. He's a really good man. But he and I are totally on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how we look at things. And one of the things I said to him is I said, you cannot reject facts because it doesn't fit your particular narrative that you believe in or your ideology. And you can't like something because of feelings. Feelings don't get it done. I said, there are facts and there are feelings. And I said, and never the twain shall meet necessarily. Your thoughts about that in this country today?
Well, here's the problem. And the problem is that if you talk with most people, they will say, but I do have the facts, Gary.
Yeah.
I do have the facts.
And that came up in this conversation, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. The government says that, we have 5.6 unemployment. So I'm believing the government. Well, what about the 92 million people who they don't count?
Exactly.
And what about when you look at retail sales? And I wrote a column, a commentary a while ago saying, let's see, we had the worst retail sales for the month of December in many years, but we had the best Christmas. I then challenged that because I said, well, what you're adding in at Christmas is restaurants and bars. I then got from the National Retail Association, I didn't know they listened to me or read my stuff. They came after me big time. They said, well, no, we don't count bars and restaurants. But then you go to their data, and number 13 out of 13 says places of food dispensement and places of liquid refreshment, however they phrase it. I sent back and I said, if that's not a bar and a restaurant, please define what it is. And so when you get this stuff, we get the unemployment numbers from the government. We got one of the things that was really big when Barack Obama came in 6 years ago was very actually small. It was a thing called the birth death. And birth death for employment for jobs is they go in and they look and they say every month a number of jobs, hypothetically, or a number of businesses go out of business. That's the death.
Right.
Number of businesses are created. That's the birth. And so many jobs die, so many jobs are created, and we'll put them together. With Clinton and Bush, it was always, plus or minus 5 to 10,000. All of a sudden, Mr. Obama took it to a new art form. It became plus about 100 to 120,000 almost every single time. And so then once a year, they kind of get back and they massage the numbers correctly. But every month you want to look, what our listeners want to look at is that birth-death number, because invariably, I just heard today Canada did their revision for the month or for the year of 2014. They said, well, oops, we revised down 35% the number of jobs we said that were created. Canada's now on an art form with China and with the United States and, all over the world. The old saying used to be, when you ask a government official, what's 2 plus 2, he would look at you and say, what do you need it to be?
Yes, that's exactly right. In your article, you really lay it out very nicely. It's a really nice read where you say, quote, IBM will lay off several thousand, not the 100,000, 25% of workforce as reported by Forbes, unquote. But my job is secure. Oil will reach $200 a barrel someday, according to an OPEC official, but we're still oversupplied by 1.5 million barrels per day, and the U.S. oil patch is withering away. But I, the citizen, am only paying $2 at the pump, and so it goes throughout the article. And I was really intrigued by that because it's so true today. We also have gotten to a point where we get to the end of our little discussion, and people will say, well, my truth isn't your truth. It's kind of the old Scarlett O'Hara thing that you point out in your article, fiddle-dee-dee, I'll think about it tomorrow, instead of the idea that I should be involved today.
It is easy to simply pull yourself into the cocoon.
Yes.
And it's so easy to do that because it's, it doesn't bother me and it's not affecting me. And I know the guy in the corner with his sign and his kids and his dog standing there is homeless and he has no money and like that. But you know something? I'm going home. I got food on the table. And so it's very simple to do that. We've become, and unfortunately, we have become a nation of, do I dare say this, the sheeple, that we listen to the government. We want them to say, one of the big things is, and I ask people all the time, they'll say, well, what would you do? Tatro, what would you do? And I say, well, the first thing is I would bring every soldier back home. Okay? Now, that's a whole different discussion that we have.
Right.
But the question becomes, when you look at if we have this oil self-sufficiency in the United States, which is in dire need or in dire problem because of $45 oil, $85 oil, we're working. But $45 oil, we're in trouble. And so if you look at what is it? Why is the president? Why did he diss the head of Netanyahu, the head of Israel, to go spend time with the senile new head of Saudi Arabia? It's all about oil, baby. And I will tell you, when you look at our troops around the world, you have to ask the question why. I'm a historian also, and you look at Rome. One of the demises of Rome, or the main demise of Rome, was the extension of their military, and they put them in Britannia, which was England. They put them in Germania. They put them in Gaul, which is France. And then you had to provide. You had to survive. You had to provide the food, the armaments, everything. And that's what we have to do for our military. But if you understand that one of the biggest components of our GDP is the military-industrial complex, you'll understand why we're around the world. It's not for all the garbage that I hear. Well, we have to protect democracy. We have to do this. We have to do that. It's the military-industrial complex. It is putting money into that area. That is the whole thing. And bottom line has been, there's a movie back in 1975. I wrote a piece that came out today. That is, and you'll probably have it on your wire. And that it talks about a movie in 1975 with Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway. It's called 3 Days of the Condor.
Right.
6 of the 7 guys in his think tank were assassinated. Why? Because they had discovered the potential of the United States invading the Middle East for oil. Here we are 40 years later, and we're there for what reason?
Oil.
Obviously, oil.
Yeah. We're going to take a break, Bill. We're going to come right back with you. I want to ask you some more questions about, but what's it to me? It's everything. Okay? We're called to be citizen activists. We're called to be involved. We're called to care. We're called to care not only about ourselves, but also about our country in the long run. We are the custodians. We'll be right back with Bill Tatro after this on the Gary Sutton Show on News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show with Bill Tatro, who's the author of 44th, A Presidential Conspiracy, and he joins us again here on the show. He's also an economics expert and a fellow talk show host of It's All About Money. And I always love to have a fellow talk show host on, Bill. It's a lot of fun to go back and forth. But I wanted to ask you a question. You were talking about all the different things here, but what's it to me? And we seem to say that an awful lot in this country. And I wanted to ask you a question. How did we get to that point as a general populace? How did we get to the point where we said, it really doesn't matter to me that much? Now, every now and then we have a brick thrown through our window like 9/11, or we have Ebola threatening to attack the country, and we all kind of gather together and get an opinion on that. But for the most part, we say, well, it's not me. It's happening to that guy over there. And I wonder how much of it could be blamed on the age of disposability, where we kind of don't have a long attention span in this country, and we forget very quickly. For example, if you talk to someone today about Ebola, say, oh, yeah, I remember we were talking about that this summer, but no big deal now. I mean, that's kind of the attitude we have. We dispose of things right away and move on to something else, don't we?
We do, Gary, but here's the thing. If I were to say to you, .com crash, think it had an effect on a few people in the United States?
Absolutely.
How about the crash of 2008? How about the plummet of housing in 2007, 2008? Have an effect?
Huge.
Of course. Huge effect. When it comes to people's own pocketbook, that's when it hurts. That's why people have to understand. When they talk about the Cyprus bail-in, people say, what? What's that? That was when, by the way, they took... A bail-in is when you have deposited money in a bank, they take it because they say, well, the bank's not going to go under. We're going to use your money to support the bank.
Right.
When they talk about these different things, and last week, as an example, just most recently, the Swiss National Bank had been pegging the Swiss franc to the euro. As the Swiss franc would get stronger, they would bring it down. They'd make it a little weaker. As the euro would get weaker, they would bring it up. So it was pegged at 120. Very simple. You knew that was coming. That's been coming for the last couple of years, or doing it for the last couple of years. Meant great profits for people because it was guaranteed. So therefore, you have hedge funds that go out and say, well, I'll make the bet that they're going to continue doing it. I'll put down $1. And, oh, by the way, I'll invest 99. I'll do 100-to-1 leverage. In a matter of a couple of minutes, when the Swiss bank said, no, we're going to let it float and be free and do what it's going to do, you had various hedge funds get wiped out. You had people done, and in New Zealand, one of the guys there commits suicide because he watches his hundreds of millions of dollars net worth gets wiped out. We are in the particular position we are right now. We are heading towards, I think, what will make 2008 look like a beginning, a warm-up for what's happening. Asset protection for 2015 is going to be critical. So when you look at all these different things, whether it's Ebola, whether it is, we send our people to Africa, right, because of Ebola. That's what the average person will say. Do you realize the amount of oil that's on the east and west coast of Africa? Do you realize the amount of Chinese that are in there? And now we have to start getting our people in there. Well, why not use the Ebola excuse? Of course we will. Now, I'm not saying Ebola wasn't real, but there are kind of underneath tones of things that are being done. And when you take a look and you see all these different things, well, you understand that it will come back to hit you in the pocketbook. Is it the time to buy gold? Is it the time to put money under your mattress? Is it the time to make sure that your estate is all set up properly? I mean, all these different things are things you can do individually to protect yourself going into the new year, because people may think we're an island in itself, okay? But we are interrelated. Most people, if I say, push the domino, they get a visual picture in their mind of one domino going and then the rest of the dominoes going. And that's what's happening in Europe, that's what's happening in China, and that's what's going to happen right here in the United States.
We have a couple callers coming in. I wanted to grab Jim in York very quickly. Jim, you're on the Gary Sutton Show. We're here with Bill Tatro. Good morning, Jim. How are you?
Good morning. I appreciate the conversation you're having today. I would like it be more understandable for me if you or Mr. Tatro could amplify on that 92 million unemployed figure, because I know we have about over 300 million people in our country, and that 92 million figure just seems to be a little more than I can put on a scale.
Okay, let me ask Bill about that. Bill?
Well, it's very simple. It goes to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what they do is they look at the number of people who have now dropped off of the unemployment. You get so many weeks of unemployment. They also will look at the number of people who are doing part-time. They'll look at the number of people who are in jobs that they're not supposed to be in, or let's say that they're not trained for. And they put it all together. That's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And it's hidden in their numbers. It's 92 million. And that's the participation pool, which continues to decline. And as we see more and more people who are going to be let go, whether it's IBM, whether it's Caterpillar, whether it's the oil patch, these folks are not going to be counted, because if you can get the not counting of those, Abbott and Costello does a great routine, and they've kind of brought it up from who's on first to the continual, the guy says, oh, wait a minute, so they're out of work, but they're not counted as unemployed. It's very simple. You have people who are either not out of or out of work, and if you listen to Janet Yellen, she'll tell you they're all retired. They're all right. Yuppie. They're all baby boomers who are living in either Boca or maybe York. I don't know. So
I'll tell you what. If they're in York, they're hiding. They're trying to find a way to Boca right now because it's really cold. Bill, it's been great talking to you. I wish we had about 5 hours today. We go on a little longer. I hope we can do it again sometime soon.
Well, Gary, it's been a pleasure, and I hope that we can do it again sometime, and I look forward to it.
I'll look forward to it.
BillTatro.com. If people go, and they can kind of search it, and they'll see all about me.
And the book out there, 44th, A Presidential Conspiracy. People can pick that up on Amazon, and I would imagine at most good bookstores, right?
Absolutely.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you, Gary.
Take care. Bill Tatro with us on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Interesting stuff this morning.